Hello, 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 and welcome to a blessed inter-UFC schedule week type edition of Heavy Hands. I am your host, Connor Ruebusch. With me is my beloved co-host, Phil Mackenzie, who this week is a New York boy. Which means, Phil, I now have just the barest hint of logical grounding to hit you with this classic joke. Phil, what's the difference between toilet paper and a shower curtain?
I have no idea.
So you're the one. Hello, welcome to Heavy Hands.
Amazing, Connor.
Thank you. You just had to be within some kind of geographical proximity for that joke to make sense. I'm glad I finally got the chance. As I've already noted, you're listening to Heavy Hands. As I also already noted, we have no UFC card to discuss this week, and it's wonderful. It's everything I've ever wished for. It's just a blessed relief. And we always enjoy having these weeks off to get a chance to discuss some kind of topic. And there's a topic that just immediately jumped to mind as something we should be talking about because everybody in the MMA community, it seems, is talking about it. And I'm speaking, of course, about the idea of a new 165-pound division, or as it's already been dubbed, and goddamn you if you try to change this, the super fighter division. So what we thought we would do is sort of see what a division like this would look like. Who are the guys at the current surrounding weight classes, lightweight and welterweight, who seem like they would make the best transition to that weight class? How would they perform? And Phil had the wonderful novel idea of essentially just doing a 32-fighter tournament of potential 165-pound fighters to decide who the champion would be and sort of just see how the division would shake out in real time. So that's what we're going to spend most of today's episode doing. Before we dive into that, though, Phil, did you watch Bellator last weekend?
I did.
Why? Oh, I mean, good. We had a few words, right?
It had to be done.
Yeah.
I think, we've seen that, and I think Ben Folks over at MMA Junkie has also written about this. We've seen the Bellator Heavyweight Grand Prix run to its almost conclusion, and up until now, it's run pretty much according to plan.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone's made it to their scheduled fights, and the people who have ended up in the final are pretty much the two that Bellator would have wanted in the final, I think. I think, they've got their current actual prime, actually good champion, who they can hopefully sell more after this, if and when he wins.
And
they've got Fedor Emelianenko, who they presumably paid quite a bit of money for, and who has the biggest name out of anyone in their tournament.
They're one fighter with a big name that has no association with the UFC.
Yep.
Yeah. Does anybody else want to see Fedor lose to Ryan Bader is my question. I mean, let's be real. It is Ryan Bader. So depending on how much respect and or fear he has in his heart when he looks across the cage at Fedor, anything could happen. But he's not Chael Sonnen. Does anybody want to see Ryan Bader beat Fedor other than Bellator?
Ben Cohn.
Oh.
Friend of the show, Ben Cohn, wants to see Ryan Bader beat Fedor.
Yeah, but Ben would like to see Ryan Bader, beat. What's a funny thing to beat? An egg. I don't know. I couldn't come up with anything on the spot. But yeah, I suppose so. Do you have any thoughts on the Sonnen Fedor match as it played out, Phil?
It was classic Chael Sonnen in that he was,
it was sort of like Derek Lewis's last fight, but for the Chael Sonnen mold. It was an archetypal performance.
Yeah, and he managed to get kind of both parts of a Chael Sonnen performance in. Like, impressive, aggressive wrestling, and then completely imploding in hilarious ways.
Yep.
And more specifically in his recent years, I think it really starts to bring to the fore the fact that he had like a significant US political career, because he manages to kind of blur the line between incompetence and outright fraud. Like this is the second performance he's had in Bellator, which is where he's imploded so spectacularly that people have wondered whether he actually threw the fight.
Yeah, and I mean, you could certainly, like, I think with Chael Sonnen in particular, you have to ask those questions. You have to be like, well, clearly something is not above board. It's Chael Sonnen. But also, it's masterfully done because it's the way that he always implodes. As I said, it's archetypal. So, like, you really can't say it's unusual behavior for Chael to, like, comfortably take down and control a faded heavyweight whose only remaining abilities are, like, his speed and scrambling. And then just decide to, from a very bad position, try to do like a double lapel rollover to take us back and allow him to scramble and use his speed to smash you.
I mean, a pretty good position.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. From a referee's position, from like a ride. And then like you can take the back like that, but he didn't even have the right grip to try. He was just like, I'm going to flip over now. And then curl up seconds after Fedor realizes I've compromised my position. Just curl up. And real classic performance.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the great things about Chael is that he's this nominally dull, grinding wrestler who just gets it into his head that he's just going to try the wackiest shit and often get killed for it. I mean, but the thing is that it hasn't always killed him, and that's that we can't run the risk of applying this as being a consistent like way that he throws fights or commits, or just throws himself on his sword, because you remember when Anderson Silva caught Chael's kick and he did like the diving barrel roll out of it.
Yeah,
like imagine if he just landed on his head and then. And then Anson had just punched him out. We'd be saying these exact same things. And there's obviously, the spinning back fist into getting kneed on the ground against Anson the second time. And you know what I'd also like to add into the mix?
Yeah.
Pulling the guillotine on Shogun. If that hadn't worked, that would have looked like the absolute dumbest shit imaginable.
Mm-hmm. Because didn't he also try that against...
Against Tito.
Oh, yeah, against Tito. Yeah.
Something, yeah. And this is the thing, is that if that hadn't worked against Shogun,
for some reason,
Shogun
I feel like
still a tremendous ground and pounder.
Yeah, exactly.
A big, strong guy. And I'm almost certain he just would have pounded Chael out.
For some reason, I feel like he also tried it against Rashad Evans with disastrous results.
Yeah.
There was something where he like allowed himself to be grounded or something. Yeah, it's not that it's always like a terrible idea, a sudden crazy move. It's just the way, the emotional resonance of like the catastrophic failures in Chael Sonnen's fights, where he does seem to just the moment he feels something he doesn't like, he just can't make good decisions. He just becomes utterly suicidal. And so, yeah, it was great. He absolutely should have beaten Fedor Emelianenko. But as you said last week very presciently, essentially you predicted there's a very good chance he would lose in pretty much this exact way. He would feel something that he didn't like and then throw it away in an instant. Yeah, well, that's the Bellator Heavyweight Grand Prix. Let's go ahead and talk about a weight class that is not just, by its very nature, utterly depressing. In fact... the bracket we've put together here, a list of 32 fighters from both 155 and 170 who we think could benefit from a move to 165, is pretty enticing. And even just randomizing the names so that all of our sort of three tiers are mixed up has provided a lot of really intriguing matchups, I think.
I think it is actually loosely tiered. And it is loosely seeded.
Okay.
So what do you reckon? Should we just let's just talk everyone through the brackets?
Yeah. Just really quickly before we start reading names, I do want to say you're going to be compelled, listener, to nitpick and suggest why some people shouldn't, and ones obvious ones that we missed, and so on and so forth. We should say from the get-go, the context of weight cutting as it is right now in MMA makes this a little bit wonky, right? Because Ideally, pretty much everyone at 155. Who were the two we came up with, Phil? There are only two current lightweights.
John McDessie and Gregor Gillespie.
Yes, John McDessie and Gregor Gillespie. They should stay at 155, ideally. And everyone else should be at 170 already because everyone cuts a tremendous amount of weight in MMA these days. So the ones that really stand out as being way too big for lightweight are, in fact, probably 2 sizes too big for lightweight. Not even probably. Like, James Vick is literally the size of Luke Rockhold. He's a middleweight. So just get that out of the way. You may not be fully satisfied, but these are, I think you will agree, some good general ideas for a wide range of fighters that could benefit from a move to 165. Phil, you want to go through the list?
Yeah, sure. And the other one notable that we have left out is Khabib Nurmagomedov, because he's the 155 champion, but he's obviously had huge issues making 155. But we thought, seeing as he's still the champion at that weight class, it's a bit we can't quite include him. And also, it will be interesting to see who shakes out as kind of a new champion. There would be a significant chance that Khabib would win this tournament. And it's kind of interesting to see who we think would be the champion otherwise. And similarly, possible. Tony Ferguson, also a very large lightweight, but he's never had issues making the weight and has made presumably insane Tony Ferguson claims that he could make featherweight, which just seems absolutely nuts.
Yeah.
But and we excluded him as well.
Likewise, anyway, Conor McGregor might win this tournament, and is probably around the right size for 165, ideally speaking, but we left him out as well.
I think Conor McGregor, I think he's a betweener for 145 and 155.
He's huge for 145 though. Like, only by modern standards. He's massive for 145.
Yeah, that's why I think he's a betweener. I think he's like Kevin Lee. He's just too big. He's just slightly too big for being perfect for his. But I think he lived off his reach advantage a lot at 145, and I think it hurts him a bit now because he's just not quite the athlete he was down at. But he's not quite the athlete at 155, but he doesn't have the huge reach to compensate. But regardless,
yeah.
Let's talk these fighters. So we've got them passed out into 3 approximate tiers: the sort of surefire contenders, the very, very good fighters, and then everyone else.
Yeah, which does include a wide range of different, as you said, that third tier could itself be at least 2 tiers.
Yeah, and it includes, relatively raw young prospects and shot veterans, for example. So the contenders tier, we have Colby Covington, a small welterweight who does not cut much weight.
Claims Kevin to cut Lee. No weight.
Yeah. That's probably not true, but
yeah.
Kevin Lee, a ridiculously huge lightweight. Leon Edwards, a fairly small welterweight. Nate Diaz, an extremely large lightweight who I'm not convinced can make lightweight anymore. And Rafael dos Anjos, a lightweight who moved up to welterweight. And then we have the very good fighters tier. We have Bilal Muhammad, a small welterweight who I don't think cuts very much weight, who's been able to make short notice fights a number of times and can fight during Ramadan, all these other things. Gunnar Nelson, historically undersized welterweight.
Cuts no weight.
Yep. Michel Pruzerish, a former lightweight welterweight. James Vick, an absurdly large lightweight. Jorge Masvidal, a former lightweight welterweight. Michael Chiesa, another former lightweight welterweight. Yancy Medeiros, once more, former lightweight, now welterweight. Paul Felder, an absurdly large lightweight. Francisco Trinaldo, a T-bow. Donald Cerrone, a former lightweight welterweight. And James Krause, a former lightweight welterweight.
Yeah.
So a lot of transfers in this division, basically. And then we have the everyone else tier, who is a combination of skilled and old and young, and it's an interesting one. So we have Andrew Holbrook at lightweight, Chad Laprise, another former lightweight, Drew Dober, a former lightweight. Frank Camacho,
An
is he a former lightweight?
attempted former lightweight. He seems like he really should be. He's really small for 170. He's tried before
he
and
really
failed.
doesn't see. He seems slightly outsized by Drew Dober, who I never even thought of as being a particularly huge lightweight, to be
Dober,
honest.
it's all in the legs. Camacho is, 165 would be just a slight blessing for him, I think.
Jason Sago, a lightweight. Nasrat Haqparast.
Oh, you missed
lightweight.
Jason Gonzalez as well.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Jason Gonzalez, a ridiculously huge lightweight. Jason Sago, a large lightweight. Nasrat Haqparast at lightweight. Alan Patrick at lightweight. Thiago Alves at welterweight. He's attempted to make lightweight, and it didn't go well for him. Tony Martin, one of our more controversial picks. Well, actually not really. But he's a former huge lightweight, now welterweight. Diego Sanchez, who has gone on record as saying that winning the 165-pound belt is his destiny.
Oh, my God.
Davi Ramos at lightweight. Scott Holtzman at lightweight. Luis Pena at lightweight.
Also an absurdly big lightweight.
Yeah. Jalen Turner at lightweight.
Absurdly big as well.
Still baffling. And Leonardo Santos at lightweight.
Yeah. So I think we got a nice list here. We're going to we may want to take a break before we actually get into the tournament segment of this, but I think that seems like a pretty diverse array of fighters who would benefit from 165 for a diverse array of reasons. We have strikers who benefit from gaining speed against bigger opponents. We have a couple wrestlers who are already small and would probably have a much easier time controlling slightly smaller opponents. And we've got a T-Bow in there, someone who I don't know how it would shake.
2 T-Bows.
2 T-Bows. Who's our other one?
Prazeres.
Oh, yes, of course. Who may in fact be the original T-Bow. Just judging by looks, he may have himself fathered T-Bow.
Proto T-Bow.
Yeah, proto T-Bow. Primordial T-Bow there. So yeah, I think we have a really interesting arrangement here. Why don't we take a break? When we come back, we will basically jump right in to our first bracket of this tournament. We'll try to make the first round relatively quick, and that should be fairly easy because there are a few really enticing matchups in here, but many of them are like, for example, spoilers. Our first one is Colby Covington, Leonardo dos Santos. Ones like that won't be too hard to pick. And then we'll slowly, over the course of the rest of this episode, narrow it down until we come up with our 165-pound champion, and hopefully in the process, you will feel you have gained a deeper understanding of why the 165-pound division probably should exist. So all of that after this. Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it. Start the tournament. And welcome back to Heavy Hands. We've got our bracket lined up here. As promised, we're going to quickly run through the first couple tiers of this. The first fight in our bracket is Colby Covington versus Leonardo Santos. Now, Colby Covington, by virtue of not having been inactive for 2 years, by virtue of being a really, really insistent wrestler against an aging Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu kickboxer guy. I think that seems like an obvious pick.
Yep.
So Colby Covington passes through to the next round. He will be fighting the winner of Donald Cerrone versus Andrew Holbrook. How do you feel about this fight, Phil?
I feel like this is absurdly one-sided, and Andrew Holbrook has no way of getting in on Donald Cerrone, and Donald Cerrone would beat the shit out of him.
Yes, okay. So that makes it Colby Covington versus Donald Cerrone. Next one coming up, we've got this matchup. James Krause versus Thiago Alves, which I kind of like as a fight.
Yeah.
Like, even a washed Thiago Alves, Krause is not that venomous a striker that I don't think Thiago could really compete with him. I think it could be fun.
I think prime Thiago Alves would absolutely fuck James Krause up.
He would just chew up his legs.
Yeah, we've kind of seen that fight, as a matter of fact, when James Krause fought. Who was it again? Who just walked through his punches and just beat the crap out of him?
I don't remember.
He was one of your guys, Valmir Lazaro.
Valmir Lazaro. Oh yeah, I do like Valmir Lazaro. I forgot he existed.
You disgust me.
Well,
yeah, but it would have been very much like that, I suspect. But now I do not think it would be like that, and I think current James Krause beats current Thiago Alves.
Mm-hmm. Especially using that nice setup jab he was using so well in his last fight. I think he gets Alves ducking into uppercuts and knees and whatnot.
Yeah, I think at one end of the spectrum, it looks like the Lazaro fight. At the other one, it looks like the first 2 rounds of Alves against the first round of Alves against Jordan Mean, or him against that other giant welterweight recently. But okay, James Krause.
I know the one you're talking about. Yep. Next up, we've got James Vick versus Alan Patrick. So the most gargantuan lightweight versus a guy who realistically is a gargantuan lightweight. What do you like in this one?
Again, we've kind of seen that Alan Patrick is massively reliant on being able to get the takedown, and that wouldn't really work against James Vick. So James Vick.
Just size alone, I think, would be a problem. Yep.
Yeah, and James Vick, he is a good boxer. We shouldn't for getting pressured to death by Justin Gaethje is not a huge indictment against him.
Oh no, quite a few men have.
He's definitely a better boxer and defensive wrestler than, for example, Scott Holtzman.
Yes, I think that's fair. Okay, so James Vick moves on. He will be facing in the next round James Krause. Next up, Nate Diaz versus the aforementioned Scott Holtzman.
Nate Diaz.
Yeah. I mean, I do think matching pace, going for takedowns, fighting in the clinch. Holtzman has something there to do.
I mean, it might be a surprisingly competitive one, to be honest. If you think of, what Holtzman's MMA lab,
right,
MMA lab training partner Bendo did to Nate Diaz, It was extraordinarily one-sided.
And Holtzman's got one of those diverse one-size-fits-all kind of styles. You get the sense he could really adapt, and throw a lot of leg kicks, for example, or base his game plan for this particular fight around lots of shot takedown type setups, but it's hard not to pick Nate Diaz.
Yep.
Huge reach, better boxing skills. Yeah.
Yep.
All right, next up, Yancy Medeiros versus Frank Camacho.
Got to be one of the funner ones.
Yeah. Guaranteed slobber knocker, by the looks of it.
Yeah. Again, you probably got to go for the obvious pick of Yancy Medeiros. He's just.
Yeah,
he's still got a huge reach advantage, I think, in this fight, and he's more of a fighter where he would just have a huge lead. I think is the main issue, is that he would be much more likely to get his offense rolling, and that's traditionally beating Yancy Medeiros. You don't tend to do it by allowing him to get out in front.
Yeah, Camacho is a fighter built for comebacks because he's so tough, and is just innately a pretty good counterpuncher and has some nice fundamental skills. But that's exactly not what you want to do against Yancy Medeiros, who has the same abilities plus the longer reach and everything. So I agree.
If you're talking someone in a pure offensive firefight, he basically outgunned Cowboy Oliveira, which is kind of impressive.
Yeah, and survived absolutely the worst that Francisco Trinaldo had to offer. So, all right, next up then, that means we'll have Nate Diaz versus Yancy Medeiros, which is enticing. Next up, Rafael dos Anjos versus Davi Ramos, or is it Ramos? We'll never know.
I am not sure. Or Ramos.
So many options.
Yeah. So again, RDA, this is the easy pick, but not a fight that would be uninteresting.
Yeah, there's a huge
much,
experience advantage, obviously, for RDA, which is a big factor.
How much improving very quickly. Venomous grappler. RDA's often had some issues with guys who can match him in the grappling. It would be, it would be such a colossal step up.
Mm-hmm.
You got to pick RDA.
Have to pick RDA. Which brings us to Michel Prazeres versus Jason Gonzalez, which is one of the more comical frame disparities we could have come up with in this opening round. Prazeres, the stockiest of all proto T-bows, versus Gonzalez, who is just shy of being in James Vick territory as a lightweight.
The primordial cube from which all the rest of them were carved.
Michel, the Horadric cube, Prazeres. I think my feeling is Prazeres' wrestling is just too much for a guy like Gonzalez. That's always been a big weakness of his. Yeah, I think he's actually one of the more uniquely bad matchups for Gonzalez in this whole tournament. Yeah, Gonzalez
I think against a lot of people he'd actually get some success going, as he's just really big and quite offensively potent. But he's sort of in the Yancy Medeiros mold, just reach and offense and no defense. Mm-hmm. But Michel Prazeres is just someone who just bowls over their opponents if they try that.
Prazeres' build is such
play at all.
Yeah, his build is such that like Gonzalez's reach would become a liability somehow, as he would just be throwing gangly long shots way over Prazeres' head. Yeah, instant takedown sounds about right for that one. And that brings us to, so let's see, what matchup has that made for us? Michel Prazeres versus Rafael dos Anjos. Okay.
That's an interesting one.
Yeah, I don't hate any of these so far. That brings us to Kevin Lee versus Jalen Turner. Poor Jalen Turner was already sacrificed needlessly to Vicente Luque. A fight that other people pointed out was needlessly risky, especially because he is a lightweight who took that his first welterweight fight on short notice, but he's 6'3" and was notably bigger than Luque. So an obvious pick for this tournament, but unfortunately he gets the exact same short end of the stick in having to fight a much, much better. I mean, this time much, much better even than a guy like Luque and Kevin Lee. Although admittedly, far more vulnerable. It's maybe more likely that he could. I mean, he did land that spinning elbow on Luque before getting knocked out for it. So you never know.
You do never know, but you also do kind of know.
You do kind of know. All right, which brings us next up, Francisco Trinaldo versus Chad Laprise.
I am picking Francisco Trinaldo by second round knockout. I don't know why, but
tough one to call. Yeah, some inescapable feeling in my mind tells me that Trinaldo wins this matchup. Which is unfortunate because I like the idea of Chad Laprise at 165. But he's out. Sorry, bitch.
Which gives us another unpredictable matchup in Kevin Lee and Francisco Trinaldo.
Yeah, it really was. I've been thinking in my head we'll get to that when we get to it. But that fight was actually very back and forth when it played out last time. So yeah, that's interesting. Next up, Gunnar Nelson versus Tony Martin. The lightweight who move up to welterweight, and the classic example in Nelson of the welterweight who doesn't cut weight.
I'm interested to hear your take because you hate Gunnar Nelson more than life itself.
I mean, this is a really intriguing matchup, right?
And you love Tony Martin.
I do.
So can you bring yourself to pick Gunnar Nelson over Tony Martin?
Yeah. I mean, the thing is
and also, have you ever picked Gunnar Nelson to win anything?
Why would I? Is the better question. It's a really interesting matchup, though, isn't it? This isn't just my personal biases. One of those
interesting ones. I'm not just
because we've got a newly quick-handed, accurate, and very poised counterpuncher in Tony Martin, who's a big problem for him in recent matchups. I mean, not one that he hasn't been able to overcome, but a problem has been low volume. And we have him matched up against a guy like Gunnar Nelson, who just loves to eat counterpunches. He really gets a kick out of it. Has terrible defense and tends to lunge in straight lines with his hands down low and his chin very, very, very high. But we also have Nelson as a substantially better athlete in terms of speed and explosiveness, a shockingly good takedown artist, and one of those kinds of jiu-jitsu practitioners who embarrasses other people that you usually think of as good submission grapplers for MMA. So, yeah, I'm going to bank on Nelson's toughness. I don't quite believe in Tony Martin as a knockout puncher just yet, as a consistent knockout threat. And Nelson has certainly been hit an awful lot, but not many people have been able to finish him. And the ones who have been notable power punchers, I think. So the ones who have really hurt him.
Are you taking Gunnar Nelson as a round winner, though?
Boy, that's a good question, huh? Martin may in fact be the more consistent fighter. Decisions. Yeah. I think I'll still go with Nelson. I think he surprises Martin early with a takedown and throws him off by crawling all over him on the ground.
When was the last time you picked Gunnar Nelson to win anything? Was it Zach Cummings?
When was the last time? It was before I had to make a Gunnar Nelson pick. It was pointed out to my face that I have a problem picking him. Yeah. I don't know. What about you? What's your feeling?
Yeah, I mean, I actually kind of share a lot of your worries about Gunnar Nelson. That I don't really feel like he's made to win decisions. He's just, he very much is that karate as applies to BJJ, one shot, one kill type guy. And he tends to lose his idea of what to do if he doesn't get it. It makes him a tremendous finisher, but not a particularly, functional fighter in many key ways. But I think effective pressure has been the key to getting to him more than countering, really. I mean, if we think of Rick Story, Santiago Ponzinibbio, and these guys have generally been people who have pressured him while staying defensively consistent. And I still don't really trust Tony Martin's wrestling defense against something. And that Olivier Aubin-Mercier fight is still fairly fresh.
Nor is his striking defense all that great. Like, for a guy who waits on counters, like, he ate a lot of kicks from Ryan LaFleur in the midst of waiting to get his shots off. Nelson is still a very dynamic and dangerous striker offensively. So,
okay, yep. So Gunnar Nelson moves on.
All right.
Not without some trepidation. So next we have Jorge Masvidal, Nasrat Haqparast, and this fight is just too soon for Nasrat Haqparast, I'm afraid.
It's really the only, Nasrat Haqparast seems like exactly the kind of fighter who, with a few more fights, I might pick him in a surprise upset over a guy like Jorge Masvidal, just because I would trust him to get shit done. But currently, too much too soon. So, got to go with Masvidal.
I mean, he just looks like a smart, athletic, natural fighter who does exactly what he needs to win, and he's good at pushing people up against the cage and not letting up on the pressure. And it seems like a style which Jorge Masvidal would get really pissed off by and give up against, but it's just not now.
Did I currently just watch you pick him to win despite that, Phil?
No, it's too soon. It's like,
no, but I mean, you just entered his name into our bracket as the winner.
Did I do it? Damn it.
Your gut would not let you pick against Jorge Masvidal there.
Yeah.
Even as you reasoned through why he was an unjustifiable pick.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. It's just too much too soon. You just can't trust him to make the right decisions. All right. So that means Nelson versus Masvidal. Like, so far, this second round of the tournament is looking incredible. It all sounds so much fun. Next up, Leon Edwards versus Luis Pena, a.k.a. Violent Bob Ross. Is a super-duper tall guy who seems to have okay wrestling instincts but not great athleticism exactly the kind of guy that Leon Edwards would love to take down? It seems like he might be.
Yeah, this is just a huge athleticism, power,
experience.
Not necessarily power, but everything apart from maybe finishing ability disparity.
Yeah.
Leon Edwards goes through.
Gets it done with the grappling in that one, and he will face the winner of Paul Felder versus Drew Dober. A
This
weird
is an
one, right?
interesting one.
Felder still hasn't fully moved up to welterweight, but if you look at him next to Drew Dober, who has, you would not guess that Dober was the one who went to 171st.
Okay, so both of these guys are supposed to be strikers, but both of them are really, in some ways, better as offensive wrestlers.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Dober is a good clinch grinder. Felder strong in the clinch, but particularly good with his ground and pound.
Yeah, I mean, I think Felder is the better wrestler, and Dober is in fact, I would say, probably the better striker. I've never really liked Paul Felder as a striker that much. I feel like he's really always been a grappler.
Mm-hmm.
Despite all the knockouts and stuff, he doesn't really have any key striking tools.
Yeah, but I also don't really trust Drew Dober to avoid grappling with Paul Felder. And I think that's where Felder's obvious size is an issue.
Yeah.
I think Felder could actually wear him out, which not many people manage to do to Dober. So
yeah, let me have a look at Drew Dober's record. This is definitely one of the more competitive. This is perhaps the most competitive one.
A well-matched fight, you could say.
Yeah. He's beaten Jason Gonzalez, which shows that he can beat up tall people, but nothing else really.
Scott Holtzman as well, one of our other picks.
Oh yeah, wrestled him.
Mm-hmm.
And then Paul Felder has the unfortunate. The thing is that Paul Felder has fought really high-end competition for almost all of his.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he took a big step back after Francisco Trinaldo, and they realized perhaps they shouldn't just keep throwing him in there against. But yeah, I guess Stevie Ray is analogous enough to Drew Dober for me to pick Felder over him.
Yeah, even that doesn't make me super comfortable. I think this is a fun matchup. I mean, these are reasons why I would love to see this division be created, because there's a lot of interesting matchups that we just wouldn't have a chance to see right now. But yeah, I think we'll go with Paul
like I
Felder.
said, if it was a kickboxing match, I think I would pick Drew Dober.
Yeah, I think so too. Volume, movement. Okay. All right, so that means that Leon Edwards fights Paul Felder in round 2, and to decide our final second round bout, Bilal Muhammad versus Diego Sanchez. Let's not talk about this one. Bilal Muhammad will murder Diego Sanchez any way he wants. If you cannot be out-wrestled with ease, you will beat Diego Sanchez. And then finally, remember the name, will face the winner of Michael Chiesa and Jason Sago. I think a surprisingly compelling one here. Chiesa has his issues with good fundamental submission grapplers. He often leaves himself open while going for them. Sago is in the Ryan Hall mold, a surprisingly tricky kicker. Who could
I think of him as being a small budget Luke Rockhold.
Sure, I think that's actually pretty fair. So kind of a compelling one here. I get the feeling that Chiesa, with a more insistent wrestling and a more aggressive, just finishing nature, is probably the pick to make. But and probably the more interesting one to have in our tournament, to be honest. But I would not at all be shocked if a guy like Jason Sago submitted Michael Chiesa.
No, or
outpointed him on the feet.
Yeah, just beat him on the feet.
Yeah, both options.
He's probably not a worse kickboxer than Michael Chiesa, and has a range game. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it would be an interesting one. But yeah, I think Michael Chiesa is just he's just a level of physicality above Jason Sago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. All right, so that's our round 2 decided, and we'll have to take one more break before we get through the rest of this. We already spent too much time talking about some of those. It's just so hard to avoid. But a quick recap here. Our round 2 of this 165-pound inaugural tournament is Colby Covington versus Donald Cerrone, James Krause versus James Vick, Nate Diaz versus Yancy Medeiros, Rafael dos Anjos versus Michel Prazeres, Kevin Lee versus Francisco Trinaldo, Gunnar Nelson versus Jorge Masvidal, Leon Edwards versus Paul Felder, and Bilal, remember the goddamn name Muhammad, versus Michael Chiesa. All of which sound like a blast. So when we come back, we are going to try our best to quickly run through those and ultimately get to our newly crowned 165-pound super fighter champion after this. Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. You can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show. All right, welcome back to Heavy Hands. We are closing out the last three rounds of our 165-pound division tournament. Round 2, fight number 1, Colby Covington versus Donald Cerrone. Though it saddens me to say this, Phil, I think I have to pick Colby Covington here.
Yeah.
Southpaw, aggressive, tons of pressure from the get-go. Cerrone would not have the start he needed. No matter how good his defensive wrestling and all that, I just think he would be off his game from the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, wrestling hasn't been the way to get to Cerrone for a long time.
That's the interesting thing. But Covington is also like the best trash striker at 170 right now, where like everything can look as ugly as you could ever imagine, and it just doesn't matter because it's all about the pressure.
That's the thing, is that how much do you trust Cerrone to just hit step knees on Covington over and over again? Because other than that, he's just going to be in boxing range the whole time.
Yeah. He could maybe guillotine Covington. I would love to see something like that, but I got to pick Colby.
Yeah, I mean, he could. Yeah, that's the thing. He would definitely land shots on him. It would be a bit like the Pettis Ferguson dynamic we talked about. You know, Cerrone has underrated pop in his hands, especially at welterweight. I wouldn't be surprised to see him like clip and hurt Covington, but it would just be the fact he would spend the whole fight in boxing and clinch range, and he's not that great there. Yeah, probably got to pick Covington, but I wouldn't be surprised.
And just you can't understate the emotional duress that fighting Covington puts you under either. Like, it's not just that he wouldn't be in his ideal ranges technically. We know Cerrone has an issue with pressure, and Covington has a special kind of pure pressure. It's really just about making you fight. You don't have any choices, really. So, yeah. That man, Colby Covington, fights the winner of James Krause versus James Vick.
I'm going to pick James.
Yeah, it's hard to disagree with
his length, his boxing. I mean,
yeah. He's
got a pretty crafty submission game.
Underrated defensive wrestler. Yeah, James is a really strong choice in this one. I think like it feels cruel, right? Like James Vick moves up and suddenly he's like he still has reach, but now he has quick hands, and then he just fights a much, much larger man who actually persisted at lightweight longer than he did. But I think you got to go with James Vick.
Yeah. I think the main thing here is punching power.
Yeah.
That Krause showed he can be very accurate against a guy like Willie Alves, but James Vick he's not any great shakes defensively himself, but he's much better than Willie Alves is, and he, like Krause, he has great eyes for how to land a shot, but he also just has a lot more pop.
Yeah. And I'm holding out the very strong hope that like we will see things we'd never expected to see out of a guy like James Vick if he just stops cutting a murderous amount of weight. He must cut an insane amount of weight to make 155. So like better chin issues, better accuracy, looking quicker, all these things I think could be possible. Going for Vick. Vick versus Covington. That brings us to our third fight of round 2. It's Nate Diaz versus Yancy Medeiros, as you called it, Phil. Nate Diaz versus the Nate Diaz clone in Yancy Medeiros.
Yeah, he's the Hawaiian Diaz brother.
Yep.
But he doesn't have the defense of a Diaz brother, and this is a murderous style matchup for him.
Yep. The only thing he
Again,
has going
is
is
one of his worst.
substantially more power, I think, than Nate, but like in basically every other metric, he's just fighting a better version of himself.
Yeah, he can't come out the gate quickly. Diaz is a better counterpuncher. Medeiros isn't either. He doesn't have great leg kicks or lateral movement or takedowns or any of the things you really need to get to Nate Diaz.
Mm-hmm.
He would just be getting carved up from the opening bell, I would imagine.
Yes. Imagine a much worse Conor McGregor against Nate Diaz. That's sort of what Yancey would remind me of.
Yeah. I mean, he could probably hurt him at some point.
Oh,
but
yeah.
Again, there doesn't seem like a realistic path to victory.
Yeah, I agree. So Nate Diaz will fight the winner of our next bout, which is Phil.
And the bracket is being stuck. Oh, here we go.
Your internet, you son of a bitch. The winner of the next bout, which is Rafael dos Anjos versus Michel Prazeres.
Cubic Brazilian fighters go toe to toe or block to block.
I think you have to pick Dos Anjos here. That will surprise no one, but especially for things like his clinch game, an obstacle I feel like Prazeres would run into far more than he wanted to, while struggling to out-wrestle Dos Anjos. You also have the pace.
Would he struggle to out-wrestle Dos Anjos?
I think he would struggle to hold him down and consistently out-wrestle him. I don't think Prazeres is like a,
Can Dos Anjos beat T-Bows? Has he ever beaten a T-Bow?
All right, it's a worthwhile question. I don't know. Wouldn't Prazeres allow Dos Anjos to pressure him?
I don't think so. This hasn't really been.
He would just try to swing big counter punches, though. Like he doesn't throw very much.
Prazeres is quite aggressive. In his own, he's quite a pressuring fighter. Like generally.
Yeah,
I don't know. It's the fact if you can get Prazeres to back down, that's when he's generally. So the question is really does RDA have enough pressure to cause Prazeres to back down?
I feel like the thing with Prazeres though is like there are always these windows where he needs you to also need a break. When he's like between his gigantic power swings, but you know what? I had the same feeling about RDA versus Covington. Like, well, he can fit little pieces in there and just be the more skillful striker and work his way into pressuring, and he didn't do it. So,
Michel Prazeres has lost twice in his MMA career.
Yeah, it's a fair point.
To Paulo Thiago in 2013 and to Kevin Lee in 2015.
Yeah. It's a fair point. I don't think of him as like that consistent of a pressure fighter, but how much less consistent than a guy like Colby Covington do you have to be? Because, I mean, it's not like RDA didn't compete with Covington. He just didn't win. Clearly didn't win. And it's always
he competed with Gleison Tebow as well.
Yeah.
Can he beat... So the question is, again, can he beat Tebows? I mean, I think this would be a really surprisingly close matchup. Mm-hmm. I mean... I think, RDA obviously has significant technical edges, but I don't think stylistically it's favorable for him.
Yeah, you might be onto something there. In fact, I think you definitely are.
Because he is, as I said, RDA is not, he's not the most powerful pressure fighter at either weight class. And if anyone has been able to force him backwards, it's tended to slightly damage his, tended to just damage his game.
Isn't it just hard to imagine, though, the fact that like RDA's always still managed to compete and get good shots off on the people who do that to him? Doesn't it just feel like Prazeres is like a step down of that style?
Yeah, I mean he's definitely slower. He's got, as I said, he's got a less deep game. He's
a lot more predictable.
He's just does much less things. But it's a really weird one because he is, powerful, constantly forward-moving wrestlers have traditionally been just a major issue for Rafael dos Anjos, or just guys who can physically overpower him. Because his losses are Colby Covington, Tony Ferguson, Eddie Alvarez is a strange one, but Tony Ferguson, that was a sort of, someone who could out-pressure him. Mm-hmm. Khabib Nurmagomedov, wrestling. Grayson Tebow outpowered. Clay Guida, a weird combination of the two. Tyson Griffin, Jeremy Stevens. So they have they have some general commonalities of just being extremely physical fighters.
Mm-hmm.
And the guys he's beaten up on have traditionally been. So.
But I think more than physicality, it has to do with the pressure. Like, that to me is still the main thing that determines whether RDA wins or loses, is can you consistently pressure him?
Yeah, but that's the thing. That's kind of what Prazeres does.
Yeah, but the question remains, how much more predictable than Colby Covington was do you have to be in that style for RDA to still lose to it?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm gonna. It feels like defaulting.
I'm have to pick RDA.
Yeah,
but...
I'm gonna default to RDA. It's an interesting fight. I would absolutely love to see it.
Yep.
A really enticing matchup, but defaulting to RDA feels okay to me.
Yeah.
That means RDA would face Nate Diaz. I wonder who wins that fight.
Yeah.
Which brings us to our next fight in round 2 here. Kevin Lee versus Francisco Trinaldo, another rematch. And since I already teased that I would have things to say about it, I rewatched this one recently for multiple reasons, analyzing matchups for both guys, I think. And more competitive than I remembered. To the point that like Trinaldo was fucking Kevin Lee up in the first round of that fight. He hurt him to the body. He staggered him at least once, I think, with a big left hand to the chin. But that is the problem with Kevin Lee. Like, Kevin Lee feels like one of the heirs apparent for a potential 165-pound division. Like, it would just be made for him. But he does seem particularly fragile, or maybe just particularly vulnerable to being hit clean. But it's going to be a problem that I think both you and I think may be the one thing that really holds him back.
Yep. So, yeah, Trinaldo hurt him, but then he grappled with him after he hurt him, and then once he stood up after that, you could see he was just exhausted.
Yes.
Kevin Lee is one of the physical freaks, and, with the technical ability to back it up, where just grappling with him, like Khabib, like Derek Lewis, he's one of these guys where if you grapple with him, you are going to tire yourself out.
Yeah, just matching strength with him.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And he's improved quite a bit.
And it was certainly the kind of fight last time where to win it, Trinaldo would have needed to knock Lee out.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it feels like you got to go for Lee to win once again.
Yep.
And that means Kevin Lee versus the winner of Gunnar Nelson versus Jorge Masvidal.
Ooh. I don't know what to think about this one.
Right? Which of these guys do you trust less? I don't know.
So is this one of these matchups where Jorge Masvidal feels really confident, or because he feels like he's just got a read on this guy, or is it, and this guy isn't throwing much, or is it one of these matchups where he just gets really frustrated because he doesn't know what's going on?
Well, I mean, however he feels, it strikes me that there's a huge chance that a guy like Gunnar Nelson could knock Masvidal out cold in the first round, or at the very least hurt him with a really big shot. It's been a while, I think, since we've seen Masvidal suffer one of those early scares, but boy, is Gunnar Nelson built for that kind of shit.
Yeah.
But we've also got in Masvidal, if Masvidal just kept his jab working at all, he could outbox Gunnar Nelson, and he has to be one of the most stout wrestlers Nelson would have ever faced. Very difficult to take
I think
down.
the defensive grappling and his general takedown defense. If you think of how much better Masvidal did on the ground against Damian Maia than Gunnar Nelson did, that kind of it makes it a little easier. I think
maybe few fighters in this entire tournament more capable of neutralizing Nelson's style of grappling than Masvidal. So, I think Jorge seems like the good pick there. That means that Jorge fights who was it? Kevin Lee.
Kevin Lee.
Interesting.
Yeah.
All right, final fight. Final 2 fights of round 2 to decide the final fight of round 3 here. Leon Edwards versus Paul Felder.
Leon Edwards might have some trouble grappling Paul Felder.
Yeah.
But I think he could just outstrike him on the feet.
Yeah.
Basically.
Yeah, because Felder
if he can outstrike Donald Cerrone, he can outstrike Paul Felder.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Felder's got similar issues, like foot slow, relatively low volume, weights on the counter. It feels like Edwards would at least have the opportunity to play with him using speed. So I'm going with Leon Edwards.
He doesn't have either Cerrone's kicking game, or frankly, Cerrone's counterpunching either.
Yeah, so, maybe not. Yeah. So Leon Edwards beats Paul Felder, and that brings us. That means he will fight the winner of Belal Muhammad versus Michael Chiesa.
Another
interesting one.
I like Belal Muhammad. I think he's just a much better kickboxer. If you tried to wrestle with Michael Chiesa, because he is one of these he is one of these compulsory, well-rounded guys. You know, he kind of feels like he has to have a lot of pieces of his game working.
Yeah.
He might try and wrestle with Chiesa, but he out-kickboxed Tim Means, and Tim Means is a much, much, much better kickboxer than Michael Chiesa.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think he would have a lot of opportunities to hit Michael Chiesa, who, I don't know, would Michael Chiesa check the low kicks? Take your bets. Place your bets now.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point. Muhammad is a good low kicker as well.
Very good low kicker.
Yeah.
So, yeah, Muhammad's got too many options against a complete, just aimless wreck like Chiesa to just do things to him on the feet. All right, so that's round 2 of the tournament. Let's go on now. We're going to be seeing like really who the top dogs are at 165. No surprising choices here. I don't think these are essentially, because we've made quick picks and we haven't had any surprising outcomes because the fights haven't actually played out. These are essentially the top seeds left in round 3. But our fights to decide the semifinals: Colby Covington versus James Vick, who the winner of that fight will take on the winner of Nate Diaz versus Rafael dos Anjos. Rematch there. And then the other semifinal bout will be the winners of Kevin Lee versus Jorge Masvidal against the winner of Leon Edwards versus Belal Muhammad. So let's go ahead and get into that top one. Colby Covington, James Vick. Kind of interesting. I don't know. Particularly hittable Colby Covington, but lots and lots of pressure, I think, is the key in a matchup like this. Vick did not have that was what spelled his doom against Justin Gaethje. He did not have the footwork to maintain distance and keep himself off the fence. The difference here is that he would be wrestling and therefore getting opportunities to front headlock choke his opponent rather than getting knocked out once put against the fence. But he would still spend a lot of time, I think, fighting Colby Covington's fight.
I think he would also spend I think Colby Covington would take a lot of shots. He would take a lot of shots in this fight. I think Vick is a more natural counterpuncher than RDA is. Mm-hmm. He's just someone who's better at looking at people as they come in and hitting them with shots. He's not a great defensive fighter by any means, but he is a good counterpuncher. It would really be one of those ones which really illustrate. It would tell you something about what these weight disparities mean. Because if James Vick could just stuff takedowns and fuck Colby Covington up on the feet, you would be like, wow, yeah. He really should move up in weight.
Because there's also the opportunity that, like, given the way James Vick is now at 155, I'm thinking, well, Covington could hurt him on the feet just by throwing a lot, and throwing these big looping left hands. Like, I remember the Dariush fight all too well, transitioning from wrestling to striking and never letting off the pressure. But if James Vick's chin and possibly even like his reaction time, things like that, are improved by taking 10 pounds out of his weight cut, then maybe he responds to those circumstances very differently as well. But until we see it, I do feel like you got to go with Colby, because at the very least, Vick is going to be fighting the same fight that Colby fights against everyone, which is being pressured, being forced to wrestle defensively, dancing to his tune. So,
yep. Yeah, I think you kind of got to pick him, but it's another one of these fights where I'd be really interested to see it.
And as a weird one, as like a lightweight who could be a middleweight versus one of the rare welterweight wrestlers who basically doesn't cut much weight, who's quite small. Be a really interesting matchup of physicalities. But that means Colby Covington will fight the winner of Nate Diaz versus Rafael dos Anjos. Mysterious matchup here. Even harder to predict than Trinaldo Laprise.
Yeah, this is one of the bummers of the matchup of the tournament for me, because there are many interesting matchups for Nate Diaz, and this is not one of them.
Couldn't it have been Nate versus James Vick, you know?
Yeah, Nate versus James Vick would be a lot of fun to talk about, but we know what happens in this one.
Yeah. Leg kicks and wrestling.
Kicks the shit out of his lead leg and puts him up against the fence and takes him down.
Yep. So, Rafael dos Anjos versus Colby Covington. Things get less interesting as we move towards the finals.
Yeah.
So that's one semifinal. All right, the other one. Who's the winner of Kevin Lee versus Jorge Masvidal? Kind of interesting, you know, like grappling with Kevin Lee does not sound like fun. But again, like Masvidal he's really, really good at wrestling.
Mm-hmm.
And he's accurate. He's got some tricky little moves in the clinch. Like Lee is always, I feel like, just one clean shot away from being shattered. That being said, like we have not seen him get finished by a lot of people. Has he ever been knocked out, in fact?
Leonardo Santos knocked him out.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, the last one of all the guys who have hit him clean, you would expect to knock him out. But also at 165, I do have the same hope I have for Vic that Lee's chin would improve, because I know he cuts a lot of weight to make 155. I think we would probably see some kind of improvement there. And any potential stamina issues that may or may not exist with him right now at 155, I feel may also be improved by a lessened cut. So essentially the other Khabib Nurmagomedov is what I feel like Kevin Lee would be like at 165. All things going accordingly.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure I think Masvidal he is another fighter who really likes having the reach advantage.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think he would enjoy, I don't think he really enjoys doing two things, punching down at people and not having the reach advantage. And he would kind of be doing both in this matchup.
Mm-hmm.
He's a taller fighter than Kevin Lee, but he has shorter reach than him. And I feel like he would really dislike this.
He may actually be the better technical wrestler. Like Lee does rely on that strength quite a bit, I think. Like Khabib, I think his ground game is better than his takedown game by a long stretch. But still, yeah, I think you're right. It's a lot of pressure on Masvidal. It's the potential of gassing out, trying to stop those takedowns, even if you do have better technique, just because Kevin Lee is so strong. And then Kevin Lee's reach is always a bizarre X factor that I somehow managed to forget. He has freakishly long arms for his height. Really, really weird, tricky build. So
I'm just not sure if Masvidal could maintain that kind of comfortable jabbing range he likes to bully people from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I tend to agree. So Kevin Lee moves on to the semifinals. Again, no surprise there. He may, in fact, be like, if there were a 165-pound division created tomorrow, I think a lot of people would expect Kevin Lee to become the champ. And he will fight the winner of Leon Edwards versus Bilal Muhammad.
What a strange, well-rounded, difficult matchup to pick.
Right. Because I could see Muhammad actually stuffing some of those Edwards takedowns and outworking him on the feet. But, Edwards is a tricky one, right? Because, like, of all the guys in this third round here, other than Jorge Masvidal, I guess. But he is also hard to trust still. Because like he still seems to skate by just barely in some of these top fights. Even the Cerrone one, where it was clear that Cerrone wasn't winning the rounds. It was like, you know, it seems like you really could be doing more to seal this, Leon.
Yeah. I mean, but this is the thing, is that I feel like being well-rounded is somewhat underplayed in modern MMA, because you don't have to be better than everyone at either skill set you possess.
Right.
If you're a wrestler and a striker, you just need to be better than enough. You know, you need to have there don't need to be people who can beat you in both areas.
Yeah. Leon, he didn't have as complete a kickboxing game as Cerrone in that fight, but he still outstruck Cerrone.
Yeah. He didn't actually go to the takedowns that much at all.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, I've kind of got to pick Leon Edwards. He's just, I mean, apart from anything else, he's generally a quicker starter than Bilal Muhammad is, and he tends to. So if you look at their comparison, if you compare their fights against Vicente Luque, he was just able to latch onto Luke's timing much quicker than Muhammad was, who just got finished.
Muhammad didn't really manage to catch on to that timing at any point.
No. And similarly against what's his face, Alan Jouban. Bilal Muhammad, one of the things I like about him, he both has a functional game and he has an incredible will to win. He's always trying his best to win the round. And
doesn't that make it really enticing to think of him fighting a guy like Leon Edwards in particular, though?
Yeah,
like Edwards leaves so many gaps where I just don't think Muhammad. I agree. Like he's really marked by his relentlessness, his determination to gut out the rounds and win by any means necessary. And Edwards would give him plenty of chances to do that. I agree. I think we'll end up picking Edwards. As just the better athlete. Weirdly,
I mean, it's difficult to Leon Edwards might not be doing all that much win his rounds, but he's one of those fighters where you can say that, but then you can look back on those rounds and think, how many of those did he actually lose?
Yeah, exactly. And is there perhaps some reason why so many people can't take advantage of what seem like obvious opportunities to score some points?
Yeah. So yeah, I think it's got to be Leon Edwards.
Yep. So Leon Edwards
just
moves
due
on.
To athleticism and the fact that Bilal Muhammad would be fighting his way out of a hole if nothing else. Kevin Lee, Leon Edwards. It's a real interesting one.
All right, so semifinals, and this may in fact be relatively quick to decide because we have seen Colby Covington Rafael dos Anjos. Despite my hopes at the time and my feeling that perhaps Covington was what I've now assumed that Michel Prazeres is, probably also mistakenly, the basement of how bad you could be at striking and still beat RDA with pressure alone. Clearly that was not the case. And it now feels like this is basically a poison matchup for RDA. Colby Covington wins it again. Yeah,
this is unfortunate for RDA. He just has not done well against hyper-aggressive wrestlers throughout his career.
I would have liked to see RDA against plenty of other people in this tournament. Like, for example, RDA Bilal Muhammad sounds really interesting to me.
Yeah.
So, still it would be great to see RDA in a 165-pound division. But
and I almost picked him, and accidentally picked him in the thing again. My subconscious.
I mean, there's only so many times you can place a nice little number one next to Colby Covington's name and watch him move on before your nervous system starts to fight back.
So, I mean, the other thing is that we never really expressed this, but are we assuming these are 3 or 5 round fights?
That's a good question.
Because we haven't really been, because there are some where you might conceivably change your mind. You might say, I'm picking Leon Edwards to beat Bilal Muhammad over 3 rounds, but are you picking him to win over 5?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Well, at least the semifinal fights we can say confidently are 5 rounds. That doesn't spell anything good for RDA because Covington is one of the rare fighters who can actually match and even exceed his stamina. So. That brings us to Kevin Lee versus Leon Edwards, the other semifinal, and for 5 rounds.
So, here we have the issue of, can Leon Edwards fight a consistent defensive kickboxing match?
Right, and how good is your notably well-rounded style against a super dominating specialist? Like Edwards' grappling has been shockingly good, given it's not what he came up doing and not what we expected to see out of him. But can anyone really expect him to compete with Kevin Lee? And even then, would you expect him to compete with Kevin Lee without doing what everyone does and gassing after 1 round of actually having to tie up with him?
So let's have some fun Kevin Lee reach talk. Leon Edwards is 6'2", and Kevin Lee is 5'9". So he has 5 inches on him, and Kevin Lee still has 3 inches of reach on Leon Edwards.
It's just not fair.
Yeah.
It's just cheating.
Um.
I think I have to pick Kevin Lee here. Like.
Oh yeah. So, yeah, you have to pick him over because think of how competitive the Peter Sabota fight was for Leon Edwards.
Mm-hmm.
It's still. He's the kind of guy I would expect Kevin Lee to just shut Peter Sabota down completely.
Mm-hmm. And if I recall, Sabota did a good bit of like pressure boxing, showing off his hands and forcing Edwards to deal with them, and even like when Edwards fought Tumenov too, like really was struggling under pressure to just deliver counters, to just let his hands go. I do not trust him. He would absolutely be venom to Kevin Lee if he could land on his chin. It's a really dangerous type of athlete to let hit you clean. But his reluctance to let his hands go, Lee would essentially be facing a similar matchup to the Edson Barboza matchup, I think.
Yep, I think it would be more dangerous.
Yeah.
And I think he would be able to overpower Edwards much less. I think the earlier rounds would be much less dominant.
Mm-hmm.
But I think over time he'd probably just be able to push Edwards up against the cage.
There's also the strong chance that unlike Edson Barboza, who for all of his wrestling shortcomings did at least, you can at least say he clearly knew what he was supposed to be doing at every moment of that fight. There's the distinct chance that Leon Edwards would agree to continue grappling with Kevin Lee after Lee first engaged with him, and wouldn't even then make the most of the few opportunities he had to keep striking with him.
Yep. So, but he is a much more better and more powerful boxer than Edson Barboza, which would make him much more threatening. But yeah, it's got to be Kevin Lee.
Yeah, and again, a significantly better wrestler and grappler, but it kind of feels like you don't want to play that game with Kevin Lee. Which brings us to our finals, the championship bout to determine who is the number one super fighter in the UFC. Colby Covington versus Kevin Lee. That's a hell of an enticing fight.
Yeah.
Maybe not a fight that would be very pretty to watch. A lot of grinding, I'm imagining, just from the jump.
Yeah, I mean, because a lot of it would be one of these fights which would be determining who gets pushed back.
Mm-hmm.
Because neither one of these guys are good on their back foot, right?
Mm-hmm.
Neither one of them are particularly, gifted counter strikers or, have much in the way of defensive footwork. Neither of them are particularly defensively sound in any particular way. So it would definitely be a matchup of who can push the other guy, who can basically push the other guy backwards into the cage. And the obvious things are, Kevin Lee basically, despite being nominally the smaller man, packs a lot more firepower than Colby Covington does.
Oh, yeah.
And Colby Covington is much more durable than Kevin Lee is.
Mm-hmm. Covington also, by far the more committed natural pressure fighter. It is, to this day, the only way I've ever seen him actually choose to fight.
Mm-hmm.
And it has taken, to my recollection anyway, other very committed stylistic foils to make him fight any other way. And Kevin Lee, I don't get the sense he still has a set sort of direction he likes to fight in on the feet. We saw him apply lots of pressure against Barboza, but Barboza is not a pressure fighter himself and particularly susceptible to being pressured. Covington is not. So I feel like if we were if who gets to pressure, who gets to come forward is decided by the first few exchanges, Covington's just going to have the last word and kind of win that matchup, I think. Can Kevin Lee, despite the reach and everything, can he plant his feet and trade with Covington without getting touched or deciding he doesn't want to get touched and deciding to back up? I just don't see Covington folding in a game of chicken like that. And I don't see Lee having the particular stylistic know-how to convince Covington that he has to back off.
Yeah, I mean, it's it's definitely a strange one because,
I mean, I don't think that even decides the fight, but please go on.
yeah, yeah. So the other question is how much, how, how fast is Kevin Lee improving?
Hmm.
Because if you look back at his last few fights, the changes between all of them have been fairly pronounced.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Francisco Trinaldo, admittedly, in some ways, the best striker that he's fought, but he looked very uncomfortable on the feet in that fight, and it was mostly just him throwing things out to throw things out. In the time since, Chiesa, he still didn't look great. I think the Tony Ferguson fight was the first one where we saw real advancement in his striking.
Mm-hmm.
That was him using footwork. He still tends to do things like watching his work and crossing his feet and such like. But this was when he was finally, really working behind his jab. And
we saw like him genuinely timing and choosing his shots for direct purposes. He wasn't just feeling his way through the striking.
Yeah. So that was the first time we saw a real functional striking toolkit from him. And the Edson Barbosa fight was the first time where we saw him applying that toolkit with strategic purpose.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Well, even if it's the immediate question is who gets to come forward, but even if Kevin Lee was pushed back by Covington first, there are not many guys in the UFC I would expect to neutralize Covington's wrestling and counter wrestle him more effectively than someone like Kevin Lee.
Yeah, that's true.
I don't think Covington is that much better a takedown artist, if at all. You could maybe say he's a better technical chain wrestler like that, but like Lee, like Khabib, his success is really the result of his persistence, that he just keeps making you fight him until eventually you go down. Lee is similar, but significantly stronger, I think. But also Lee's probably a much better submission grappler than Covington. I don't think maybe much is an overstatement, but like people, that's the way where he really compares to Khabib. People have a terrible time once they hit the ground with Kevin Lee. He's immensely strong. That reach becomes a serious problem when he's hitting you with elbows. Like his ground and pound is terrifying. That strength allows him to sort of cheat his way through certain controlling positions, but he's also an excellent floater and guard passer. Does a great job of switching from applying tons of weight to you to just sort of hovering a few inches above you as you flail uselessly underneath him. So like great back taker. I don't know. I think that even if Covington got the fight he wanted, he would still be wrestling with Kevin Lee would still be really, really risky. Any thoughts? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's definitely one of the harder ones to pick because I think the point you raised about so again, this is one of the ones like how much does size play a difference here, because Colby Covington has been able to either compete or wrestle with people where, size really does matter. I mean, Damian Maia is a former welterweight, and Covington, whilst he didn't offensively wrestle with him much, he shut down everything that Damian Maia tried, and Damian Maia has been able to get some fairly credentialed guys down and often out. So I think Covington might have a technical wrestling edge, but as you said, does he have a power edge? I don't think he has that's the thing. I think Kevin Lee has a power edge everywhere. I think he has a power edge on the feet as well.
I agree.
Remember things like that? Do you remember that kick that he threw against Edson Barboza? And I think Barboza blocked it and then just flew across the cage.
Yeah. He's got that. He's got the weird left counter he destroyed Tony Ferguson with for a moment. The head kick he hit on Trinaldo. He's got firepower for sure, and that applies like the horsepower as well in the wrestling. That might very well outbalance whatever technical edge Covington might have.
Yeah.
And is Covington, with relying on his relentlessness, knowing that he has to keep this pace on, what happens if grappling with Kevin Lee does start to slow him down? He starts to flag, and then he's on the ground with Kevin Lee, and I don't know. I think I picked Kevin Lee. I've talked myself into it, even though Covington would pressure him. But I think it's really possible, like, Kevin Lee's just not quite experienced enough yet to know how to handle Covington. He showed the perfect approach against Edson Barboza, but Khabib showed that approach already. And again, it's particularly easy, I think, to have a strategy in mind against a guy like Barboza, because you can just tell what impact the pressure is having on him from moment to moment. It's easy to feel confident once you start pressuring him successfully. So, not the same against Covington. Covington just does not like being told no.
Yeah. I think I've also got, I'm going to pick Kevin Lee as well. The Ferguson fight is, I think, the most worrying one for me, because that's the one where he was just up against a consistent, as a rote fighter, he kind of needs, you do get the impression he needs a bit of time to think. And against Ferguson, who was just in his face the whole time, it did clearly upset him a bit. But the other thing is that people, well, like Wally Alves and so on, people have grappled with Covington and have beaten. Well, Wally Alves has grappled with Covington and beaten him. No one has ever out-grappled Kevin Lee, really.
They have a terrible time when they do it. Every time.
Yeah.
It sucks. So, yeah.
I mean, even incredibly early in his career, where he had that kind of terrible, weird fight against Al Iaquinta, and he was really early in his career and should not have been fighting Al Iaquinta. He still almost choked him out. And yeah, I mean, it just fights against guys like Magomed Mustafayev, Jake Matthews, Michael Chiesa, in some ways grappling specialists, and they just got absolutely brutalized.
It's weird. It's the kind of matchup that might look remarkably competitive, or even like potentially one-sided in favor of Covington because of the pressure and the wrestling attack, the insistence, but then suddenly flip narratives once it actually hit the ground, because that's where Kevin Lee is just a monster. He's just a terrifying force on the floor. So yeah, Kevin Lee, your inaugural super fighter champion. But okay, that's our little bracket. I hope you guys enjoyed this. We're like way over time on how much this must have been edited down at some point. If it wasn't edited down, I commend you, dear listener, for soldiering through like an hour and a half at least of fight discussion. But I think this very clearly demonstrates how truly exciting a 165-pound division could be. And even as someone who does not, I do not want more weight classes in MMA, I think it has made boxing substantially harder to follow as a sport. Added to the fact that there are 9,000 commissioning bodies with their own belts. That makes it much worse, in fact. But still, if you're going to add a weight class, 165 is, I think, very clearly one of the key places to try to do that, because you are between two of the most historically stacked divisions, and it is one of those weird 15-pound gaps between light and welterweight that at a weight point where you really don't need a larger gap than 10 pounds. So 165 looks pretty lit. And that's our bracket. Phil, are we going to release this bracket along with the episode?
I think so. I think we can tweet it out and put it in the put it in the episode blurb. And people can have a look and disagree and tell us how bad Nate Diaz actually would have fucked Hardier up.
Yeah, this time. Now he knows what to do differently. So yeah, if you want to try your own hand at our bracket, you could even perhaps, I don't know if you'll have a mechanism to randomize it here, but if you wanted to collect those names and make your own bracket and reseed it, or if you have any other interesting twists, any obvious ones you thought we missed out that should be 165-pound fighters, let us know. Play with the bracket, have a good time. And the best way to do all those things will probably be on Twitter. You can find both of us there. I'm at Boxing Bush, of course. That's spelled Busch. Phil is at Evil Greg Jackson, still the best damn handle on the site. And you can find all kinds of stuff from us there and hit us with your comments, your questions, your concerns, and your other crybaby musings. Gosh, what else, Phil? Should I even ask if either of us has anything to plug? Because there's no UFC event. I should say, I guess, look for that Derek Lewis article from me this week. How to Fight Like Derek Lewis is going to be coming out. So if you want an in-depth technical analysis of how Derek Lewis's game works, then you should hopefully enjoy that. A pretty humorous, I think, take on the technical analysis genre. Do you have anything coming out this week, my friend?
I might have something, but we'll see.
Okay.
I might have something about Khabib's threat to Khabib's threat to leave the UFC and sort of what that means for the UFC's business model, but we will see.
Okay, all right. So keep one eye peeled for that, and keep the other one firmly closed just in case nothing happens. But thank you all for listening. I hope you enjoyed this topic-based episode. We always like doing them. I guess I should say I always like doing them. Like, Phil, is this the first off week that you've actually had with me, or have we had one more?
No, we had the weight cutting one. It was cool.
That's right. So the second one that we've largely talked about the dynamics of weight cutting, but it's a fun topic, and with 165 as sort of the hot button issue of the day in the MMA sphere, I had a good time talking about it, and I hope you all enjoyed listening to it. And if you came here today for the finer points of face punching, this has been an egregiously long edition of Heavy Hands.